At the same time, of course, this region, LNG, and it's something that's on your agenda here in Singapore, is going to continue to grow. The scale there, between 2008 and 2012, we're going to see a 50% growth in LNG in the world and in Asia. So what is clear is that natural gas is not only going to increase in absolute terms, and it's a subject we ourselves are debating, but also we think it's going to increase its share of the energy mix. And it is a lower carbon fuel and will be very important, particularly in electric generation. But you may actually have a question. How can I be so confident with all this technological innovation going on that the most important energy innovation of this decade is unconventional gas? How can I be so confident? And the reason I'm so confident is that we have only about 45 days left in this decade. And so I think it's very unlikely that we're going to see a major new innovation because we have Christmas and all these other things that will kind of get in the way of it. But what about what may be the most important growth story in energy? Most important growth story in energy is actually, it sounds like the reverse of growth, that is the growing role of energy efficiency. I'm really struck by how it's at the top of the energy agenda around the world, again, in a way that we've never seen before. But as those who are working on it, like the Energy Marketing Authority, know, it is a challenge because energy conservation is not a thing. We have not yet ever seen an energy efficiency refinery. But it's a process. It's shaped by pricing, by policy, by mandates and regulations, by security, by the pace of technological innovation, by attitudes and values are a very important part of it, and of course climate. And what I find, and I notice in the dialogue on climate, people say in terms of having the biggest impact quickest, the way to do it is by becoming more efficient. In the OECD economies, we've seen a doubling of energy efficiency over a period of 30 years. We're going to see a more intensified pace going forward. And the thing is, we have tools and technologies today that we didn't have in the past. And the smart grid is obviously the answer, an example of that. I'm really struck around the world by the degree to which people have embraced the smart grid. People really like the smart grid. I have found nobody who's in favor of the dumb grid, so I think we can be pretty sure that it's going to have popular support. What it is the application of information technology and upgraded transmission and distribution capabilities. We're still finding the way, and as this conference points out, Singapore is positioned to be a leader in terms of initiatives on smart grid and making the smart grid a reality and demonstrating how you really put all of these pieces together. So we need to shape together an energy future that meets two demands. It's the demand for economic growth, the demand for rising incomes and a better life, and a demand for a cleaner environment. I think we can be pretty sure that we're going to have a more diverse energy mix, especially when we get beyond 2030, and a much, much more efficient energy system. But, and here are the buts, it will require realism in policy and fiscal regimes. It'll require commitment in terms of investment, consistency in terms of innovation, and a great deal of national consensus and international cooperation. All of that will be required in the era ahead, and what is, I'm sure, destined to be the century of energy innovation. And that is what makes Singapore International Energy Week so timely, and why the dialogue that will unfold here is so important. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for a great speech, first of all. That was fantastic. It's John Richardson from ISIS. We are a chemical information supplier, a media company. Question is the carry trade and the effect on oil prices. There's a lot of talk in the press at the moment that, it's been financial sector driven, borrowing in US dollars and relending and speculating in oil, etc. Do you see that as a concern that the oil price has gone up too much, too quickly, for steady economic growth because of things like the carry trade, and that it could collapse again over the short term, back to about $40 a barrel? Right. So the second question, is, I don't know if you could comment on the IEA report about natural gas demand growth and how that may not be, supply has increased enormously, and how you see the natural gas demand-supply balance in the next 20 years, I guess. 2 questions. Thanks.
Right. Well, on the first question, it looks like we see the world economy recovering, and it seems to be taking current oil price, commodity prices in stride in that. As I said in my remarks, it was amazing. Last year, in June of 2008, I was testifying to the Joint Economic Committee on energy prices, and I was kind of scratching my head because you could see that demand was going down. You could see we were moving into a recession, and oil was going up, and people were saying it was going to go to $200 or $250. And it seemed to me that there was an assumption that price didn't matter, and we know that price does matter. It affects policy, it affects consumers, it affects the overall economy, and by the way, it affected the lower income people who had subprime mortgages and added to the help bring, I think, contributed to the downturn. So I think we need to be sensitive, and the notion of people, that if we saw oil go back quickly to $100 or above that, I think it would be 2 things would be at work. One, it would be because of the dollar, and I'll come back to that in a second. And it would be, I think, it would be a negative for economic growth. It certainly would be a negative. It would be one of several factors, but not healthy. It is, the dollar for so long was the place people went to during times of instability. They sought refuge in the dollar. Now we see, in terms of currency instability, they turn to commodities and to oil. And I think we are seeing that, and it's almost mechanical in the way that it unfolds. The second question about natural gas, I think it's just beginning to assimilate what this energy innovation that I talked about means. We at CIRA are trying to look at it in a North American context because I would say from a policy point of view, it was only really in July or August of this year that people really started to see the impact of it. Obviously, it's very sensitive to the economic cycle, but it opens up it's like a new resource. So, and if we see it on a global basis, I think it means more competition in the global gas market. I think it would also create greater confidence on the part of consumers in terms of using gas. And what gas does do is, there's a lot that's supposed to happen in 2050. The question is, I was suggesting, how do you get from here to there? And gas is something that can play a very important role in the between here and there. And so even for those who import gas, the notion for industrial consumers, for buyers, that the world is more supplied and that it's available, I think will really help to solidify the gas market.
Dan, I just want to follow up with a couple of related questions off my own, touching on the dollar. Do you think the dollar, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here, so forgive me. Do you think the dollar is going into structural decline? And if we do see a return back to $100 a barrel, is that going to derail this nascent economic recovery?
Well, I think the $100 a barrel is definitely not good for this, for the reasons that we've seen before. People will kind of will not focus on it, but I think it is definitely a negative. A structural decline, it is, I talked about this changing balance between China and the United States. It's very interesting to have hear China lecturing the United States about its fiscal practices,